In my past 4 years of high school, I've done over 600 hours of community service right here in Milwaukee. And yet, I'm incredibly selfish. See, I used to despise the entire concept of community service. To be blunt, I considered it to be a one-sided relationship where the volunteer works hard and gains nothing. Now, looking back, this outlook strikes me as spiteful and absolutely incorrect. But perhaps the origin of my resent can best be understood through one of my first experiences with community service. So one muggy September afternoon, near the beginning of my time in high school, my entire class took a field trip as part of my school's effort to increase interest in volunteering. We headed downtown to this community garden that grows food for people living with food insecurities. For 3 hours, my job was to whack at weeds with a shovel to clear up space for new crops. Now, here's the thing. I'm incredibly and terribly allergic to pollen. So within 5 swings of that shovel, I was sneezing like crazy, watery eyes, skin itching, and just to make matters worse, this field trip just happened to coincide with an unprecedented surge of mosquitoes in the area. So swarms of these parasites were just ravaging the garden, attacking any piece of exposed skin. In hindsight, it probably was not my best thinking to wear shorts and a t-shirt. That part's on me. Well, after 3 hours, we finally piled back into that school bus, and at that point, my watery eyes and nonstop sniffles might as well have been tears of joy. I was just happy to leave. So, why did I share that story? Was that just to expose how frail and coddled my immune system is? Actually, kind of. See, to the credit of my school, many of my outdoorsy peers loved the experience, and they went on to regularly volunteer in this sort of environment. But with my allergies, I simply was not cut out for this form of community service. The day felt like nothing more than painful labor. I felt like I had gained nothing, and I extrapolated this resentment to the entire concept of volunteering, concluding that it's a one-sided relationship. So when I found out that my school requires that I must do 20 hours of community service to graduate, I was not a happy camper. And honestly, at that point, my one goal was to find the least intolerable way to get it over with. Coming out of a summer job as a math tutor, I settled on volunteering at a daycare called Crescent Learning Center, which provides care to children of refugees. On my first day, I remember walking in with this very narrow and conceited mindset. I felt that I was there to do these kids a service, and that they would be as refugees are often portrayed in the media: sad, needing, helpless. But from the moment I walked into Crescent Learning Center, I came to realize that I could not have been more incorrect. The atmosphere was so vibrant and joyful, the place was filled with laughter, and I think, most importantly, they saw me as the 14-year-old kid that I was. I remember halfway through our first day, we took the kids outside for a short recess. I plopped down under a tree and pulled out my phone. I figured, at this point, we're not doing anything that involved tutoring, so they have no need for me. So I was actually really surprised when I looked up and saw 5 kids hovering over me. They wanted me to join them in their game of pickup basketball. Reluctantly, I joined, but within moments, I was running around, laughing, shamelessly dunking on 8-year-olds on a warm summer afternoon. I was having fun. And I left that day eager to return, to spend time with these awesome kids. Within a few weeks, I had completed my mandatory 20 hours of community service, but I had stopped thinking about that long ago. I was there because I genuinely enjoyed it. In fact, there were often times where I would forget I was there as a volunteer. It really felt like spending time with lifelong friends. But while it was tempting to think of these kids as just like me, there were also these moments where I would suddenly remember that that isn't the case. I remember one particular moment where one of the boys very emotionally shared with me that his dream in life was to ride on an airplane. And I just looked at him funny. Riding on an airplane is something I've done countless times. It's really not something I consider to be that great. And yet here I was, looking a kid in the eyes as he shared that his dream in life was the mundane part of my vacation plans. Wow. And I wish I could say that in that moment I felt grateful and fortunate, but the truth is I felt scared and out of place. And all I wanted to do was leave Crescent Learning Center and drive back home to my bubble of suburban ignorance. But from the moment I walked into that daycare, that bubble had popped. I was exposed to the city that lies beyond my white picket fence neighborhood, and I could not go back to ignorance. I ended up spending the rest of my summer at Crescent Learning Center, and as I became a more familiar face, I also began speaking with some of the parents as they picked their children up. As they opened up about the atrocities they fled as they left their home countries and the struggles they continue to face as refugees living in Milwaukee today, I once again felt myself being acquainted with new perspectives, and I wanted to share those stories. Since I was 8 years old, I've dabbled in filmmaking, though honestly, calling them films was a bit of a stretch. They were short skits I'd filmed with my sister, or little epic fail videos, unpolished, frivolous, and really just for fun. But I wanted to do justice to these courageous refugees' stories and create a platform that would effectively illuminate their hardships. And even with my minimal filmmaking experience, I knew that a documentary would be that platform. So I took quite a leap from those epic fail videos, and over the course of 6 months, I directed and produced my first independent documentary titled Crescent of Hope, which details the struggles of refugees in Milwaukee and also encourages other residents of my city to venture from their own bubbles and acquaint themselves with new perspectives. With the goal of raising awareness, I'm proud to share that Crescent of Hope has been screened in 10 international film festivals, ranging from Istanbul, Turkey, to Times Square, New York City. But I think the most meaningful part of this experience is for the first time I came to understand that in order to enjoy volunteering, we must enjoy how we volunteer. Compared to whacking weeds with a shovel, the opportunity to produce a documentary on a pertinent social crisis was far more compelling and notably challenging. But because the process demanded such creativity and persistence, I ended up growing as a filmmaker, all the while discovering a passion for helping others. I walked into Crescent Learning Center ignorant, with a frivolous hobby for making short skits and a very, very narrow perception of community service. But the inspiring individuals I met at that daycare transformed my pastime into a passion, sparking in me an unexpected love for community service. Slowly, my hobbies began merging with acts of service until the two felt indistinguishable. I took a pastime of playing guitar and began strumming in hospital lobbies to alleviate stress. I produced a second documentary on Milwaukee's underinsured refugee population and the effects of community clinics to ameliorate this issue. And then I came across a crisis so vicious and so multifaceted that it had me stitching together nearly every hobby I have. And that's Milwaukee's opioid epidemic. Between legally prescribed painkillers and their nearly chemically identical illicit counterparts, like heroin and fentanyl, these drugs have ravaged my city across age, ethnicity, and socioeconomic status, and they have taken lives at a terrifying rate. So I was shocked and frankly embarrassed to learn that the leading cause of non-natural deaths in my city had taken hundreds upon hundreds of lives before I knew anything of what an opioid even was. With a background in science research and a desire to make a difference, I began working with 2 professors to study this epidemic. But as my eyes opened to the severity of this crisis, I became more frightened by my ignorance. How could I have gone so long without knowing what's going on? And how many more kids still have no clue about this problem? With that in mind, I founded the Opioid Epidemic Awareness Campaign, with the goal of preventing further deaths through public awareness and peer advocacy. I began working with a Milwaukee Public Schools curriculum specialist to design a presentation that would cover the entirety of this crisis, from the neurobiology behind opioid addiction to the societal implications, and finally, what kids like me can do to make a difference. Now, initially, I saw my age as a hindrance and as a constant reminder of my inexperience. I wondered if I was even qualified to teach other kids about this problem. But today, I actually see my youth as my greatest asset. Well, first of all, the topics I've studied in high school directly align with this topic. Things like economics, biology, peer tutoring. But I think most importantly, I'm able to empathize with my audience and connect with these students in a way that adults might not be able to. Now, while I'm really proud of the work I've done, I do want to note that I am in no way extraordinary. I'm an 18-year-old with a love for helping others, and I wasn't born with that. I believe everyone can and should dedicate themselves to personalized altruism, this idea that you can serve your community by doing what you love, especially ordinary kids like me. Now, unfortunately, it seems that kids like me are not interested in community service, and their problem is not that they're held back by any sort of skill deficit. Their problem is that they don't have the time. Because between SATs and APs and college visits, time has become the most limited and coveted commodity in a high schooler's life. So the thought of spending that time on somebody else feels inconceivable. Well, what if we could do the things we love while simultaneously helping others? Wouldn't that dissolve this dilemma of how we spend our free time on ourselves versus on our community? Now here's where it gets interesting, because doing just that might make us feel like we have more time. There was a recent study done by Harvard, Yale, and the University of Pennsylvania. And what they found is that people who spent just 10 minutes helping others felt significantly less crunched by deadlines than people who spent 10 or even 30 minutes on themselves. Indeed, the decision to improve another person's life gave way to an increase in self-worth and control over one's own life. And it's that same sense of self-worth that has attributed volunteering with reduced anxiety, depression, and other mental illnesses. In fact, a 2013 study at Carnegie Mellon examined hypertension, or abnormally high blood pressure, in people with varying frequencies of community service. And the results painted a clear picture. People who spent just 4 hours a week volunteering were 40% less likely to develop high blood pressure than people who spent no time volunteering. This gives a whole new level to the phrase, "it's nice to be nice." And here's the best part. That trend extended over marital status, age, employment, ethnicity. In short, anybody and everybody can reap the rewards of personalized altruism, so long as they embrace selfless service. Now, being selfless is not easy, but I hope my story serves as proof that it's not inherent. 4 years ago, if you had offered me a TEDx talk, I may very well have been up here talking about why mandatory community service should be illegal. Now, obviously, a lot has changed since then, but I think in many ways, a lot has actually stayed the same. See, I hated volunteering because I cared about what's best for me. I was selfish. But now, I volunteer because I'm selfish. Putting what's best for me first, how could I possibly turn down the opportunity to make films for Times Square, or to research with PhD professors, or to be up here talking to potentially hundreds of people about me? Okay, I'm going to stop being selfish for a moment and say enough about me. Let's talk about you. I want you to take a moment right now to consider the last 7 days of your life. That's it, just the last week. Try to think about how much time you spent actively helping others, and put a number to that. Keep that number in mind. If reduced anxiety, less stressful deadlines, and lower blood pressure are things you might want in your life, I'd urge you to start your own journey with personalized altruism. Think big, but start small. It doesn't have to be a nonprofit or an organized movement. It can be as simple as teaching somebody else to do the things that you love. They say time flies when you're having fun, but as the science shows, we get the most out of it when we help those around us. Thank you.